Thank you for joining Marianne and the professor. This morning, I am joined by Dr. William Makis, who is an Alberta physician. Dr. Makis, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me this morning.
Thank you.
So Dr. Makis, bring us up to speed on who you are as a physician. What's your specialty and just a little bit about you?
Certainly. I obtained my medical degree at McGill University. Prior to that, I had a bachelor degree in immunology, so at the University of Toronto. So I spent 4 years studying immunology at University of Toronto. Obtained my medical degree at McGill in Montreal, and I did my medical specialty in nuclear medicine, radiology, and oncology. Also at McGill University. At the time, McGill University was considered the best and strongest medical school in Canada. And I've been practicing, as a nuclear medicine physician since then. I was the director of the nuclear medicine program at the Brandon Regional Health Center in Manitoba for 3 years. And then I moved to Edmonton, Alberta, to take over a large cancer treatment program that was being conducted at the Cross Cancer Institute in Edmonton, where we treated end-stage cancer patients, neuroendocrine cancer patients, with cutting-edge cancer treatments, medical isotope treatments that were developed in Europe, and that have a very high response rate and cure rate for end-stage cancer patients. So I took over this large cancer program. In 2013, we grew this program. It became the largest program of its kind in North America. We were the referral center for all of Canada. I had patients sent to me from all over Canada, patients that had no other treatment options, stage 4 end-stage cancer patients. And we saved about 85% of these patients. We either halted their cancer progression, or we eliminated their cancer completely. And so I directed this program for approximately 2 years.
Okay, so let's jump into today. Currently, you are quite famous for being very outspoken on physician deaths in Canada. And from what I understand, Canada is the only country that is making a noise about the epic number of physician deaths. But tell me what transpired, that something drew your attention to this issue.
Yeah, this issue came up last year, actually. In late last year, there were 2 physicians who had died suddenly in their sleep very shortly after their booster shot. And fortunately, first of them was actually heavily publicized in the media. This was Dr. Sohrab Luchmedial, 52-year-old cardiologist from New Brunswick, who was very active on Twitter. He was very pro-vaccine, and he was very vocal about being angry at people who refused to get vaccinated, or people who were discouraging others from getting vaccinated. And so he made a number of posts that, were quite viral, where he talked about wanting to punch unvaccinated people in the face, saying things that, like, if they die, he wouldn't cry at their funeral. And so he was quite known on Twitter for his vaccine activism. He was one of the first doctors in Canada to go get his booster shot. He got his first booster shot on October 24th, 2021. And I remember he posted about it on Facebook, and people were asking him, how did you get your hands on the booster shot? It hadn't been rolled out yet. So other healthcare workers were asking, how did you get your hands on the booster shot? And he said, the booster shot went great, 2 thumbs up. And 2 weeks later, he died in his sleep. He had no prior health conditions that anyone knew of. And he really looked, very healthy, very, strong, young-looking person, died in his sleep. Now, the mainstream media published this, but didn't talk about his vaccine status, and didn't talk about the fact that just 2 weeks prior, he had taken his booster shot. And then 2 weeks later, he died in his sleep. So that was the first death that really caught my attention. And then I thought, okay, something is really wrong here. people don't just die in their sleep, and it's a young doctor, right? A cardiologist on top of that. We already knew that there were athletes that were having cardiac issues post-vaccination. There were athletes that, had already been collapsing on, soccer fields, on, in the hockey arenas, in rugby. There was a cricket star that had died as well, a famous cricket player. So we already knew this was an issue, but really it was the second death that really spurred me on to start talking about this. The second death was a 48-year-old family physician in Toronto, Dr. Neil Singh Dalla. And he took a booster shot, and 3 days later, he was at his friend's house for a Christmas Eve party, and he was feeling unwell. He lied down on his couch, and he died in his sleep. He was 48 years old. Again, no prior condition. And the reason we know about this is because a family friend had posted a TikTok on Twitter describing this situation, that he'd taken his booster shot, then a few days later died in his sleep. And he claimed that, the autopsy had showed myocarditis that he had not known about, the family had not known about. So and that TikTok video went viral. So I took those two deaths and I posted it on my Twitter account, and I started raising the alarm. This was December of 2021, and this was the first time that anyone really started talking about young doctors dying in Canada. And so I started raising the alarm. My initial posts started going viral. And I had 13,000 followers on Twitter, so I had a fairly wide reach. And it started catching people's attention, but it was only two people. And then the topic sort of quietly went away. And then unfortunately, in March of 2022, Twitter terminated my account because I raised concerns about mRNA vaccine efficacy in children 5 to 11 years old. There was a CNBC article that quoted a research study that showed that the efficacy was very low, that after a few months, the efficacy in kids 5 to 11 of the Pfizer mRNA vaccine dropped to 12%, and that by 6 months, the vaccine efficacy was actually negative, which means that the kids who got the vaccine were getting sick more frequently than the kids who didn't get the vaccine. And Twitter considered this enough to terminate my account completely. So all my posts, Twitter posts, disappeared. Once Twitter shuts down your account, all your posts disappear. And so all my posts about doctors dying had disappeared. And really, the topic didn't resurface until July of this year, when doctors just started dying one after the other. And we had 3 doctors in Ontario from the same hospital who had died within days of each other after the rollout of the second booster shot. And, that's when the topic really exploded. I went back, I dove into my files, I started researching it. And at first, I had found 13 doctors who had died suddenly or unexpectedly. I put that out. That went viral. Then I did an update in September. Just this past September, I had found 32 doctors that had died suddenly or unexpectedly, and that drew even more attention. And then just recently, I've put out my latest update, and the number, unfortunately, now is 80 doctors who have died suddenly or unexpectedly since the rollout of the COVID vaccines.
So where are you sourcing this information on physician deaths?
So initially, I had sourced it from obituaries and media articles that were written about some of the doctors. Now, of course, they will always not talk about the vaccination status of the doctors because it doesn't fit with the narrative. But that was my sort of initial source, was sort of publicly available obituaries. However, after I released my report of the 32 doctors who had died suddenly in the beginning of September, I received a tremendous response to that, and a number of people offered to help me and really offered their time and services to do a lot more investigative work. And one gentleman in particular who wishes to remain anonymous, but his name is Michael. He had actually put together a huge database of every doctor death that's happened in Canada in the past 4 years. He created, a spreadsheet, collected all the information, and basically the information has been sourced. Most of it has been sourced from the Canadian Medical Association's own website. So the Canadian Medical Association keeps an in memoriam page that is updated, fairly regularly, and they have, doctor deaths that they announce on there, and then the family can submit information about the doctor, about their life, and about their accomplishments, and so on. Now, what's interesting is that this gentleman had to use the Wayback Machine to collect a lot of this data and information because the Canadian Medical Association has been deleting this information quietly from their website. And what we've realized is that the Canadian Medical Association has deleted doctor deaths going back to 2019 and 2020. And it seems like they really don't want Canadians to be able to go back and compare for themselves to see, okay, we have so many young doctors dying, this year and last year. Why is this happening? Is this unusual? Is this, are these deaths happening more frequently than before? So he actually managed to recover a lot of data that had been deleted deliberately by the Canadian Medical Association. So we have a database of 1,638 doctors who have died in the past 4 years. This is the largest database of its kind that I know of. 970 of those were sourced directly from the Canadian Medical Association, either data that they haven't deleted yet, or data that they deleted but was recovered with the Wayback Machine. The remaining 660 were obtained from other official medical sources. The Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada, which is located in Ottawa, has their own in memoriam page. We've sourced that information. The provincial medical associations, the colleges, the provincial colleges of physicians and surgeons, who maintain information on doctor licenses. Sometimes they will write that a doctor is deceased, and that's why they're canceling their medical license. So we obtained that information, and also we've sourced information from medical schools across Canada and medical school alumni associations. So, for example, I graduated from McGill University. I'm a member of the McGill University Alumni Association. If I were to die, the McGill University Alumni Association would say, our former McGill graduate, Dr. Makis, died. So we've sourced that information as well. So all of the doctor deaths were sourced from official medical sources. Now, of course, we then went and cross-referenced everything with available obituaries, publicly available obituaries, and any other information that may be available online. That's been put into the database as well. So I've spent the last 2 months reviewing this database of 1,638 doctor deaths that have happened over the last 4 years. And I've went through each of them one by one. I have a cutoff of age 70 because that's usually the age when doctors retire. And I want to make sure that, these are actively practicing doctors, which means that they would have been subjected to COVID vaccine mandates in order to continue working as physicians in Canada. And so when I reviewed the database, in the past 2 months, that's where the number of 80, young Canadian doctors dying suddenly or unexpectedly comes from. There's an additional 60 doctors who have died who had pre-existing medical conditions that predate the rollout of the vaccines. So they may have had a cancer diagnosis prior to the rollout of the vaccines, or they were diagnosed with ALS, Parkinson's disease, dementia, or other chronic illnesses. And I did not include those in the 80. So that's a separate group of physicians who have died, who had pre-existing known conditions, and whose passing wasn't considered sudden or unexpected. And so you have 80 who are sudden and unexpected. You have 60 who had, prior medical conditions that they were suffering with. And so this is where the data comes from.
So can you expand on your findings, specifically the age categories and the differences between the since the vaccine rollout and prior prior years as comparison?
The COVID vaccine rollout started in early December of 2020. So I did not consider sort of anything before that. This is strictly since the rollout of the vaccines. And what we found was that um, you see an increase in deaths since the rollout of the vaccine across every age bracket. You see it in men, you see it in women. However, the younger you get, the more pronounced or the more increased the deaths, the rate of deaths is. So when you look at all doctors under the age of 50 who've died suddenly or unexpectedly, well, just if you look at all doctors under the age of 50, I have to correct myself, the doctors are dying at double the rate that they were dying in 2019 and 2020. So in 2021, the rate was double, and in 2022, the rate will also be double. Now, if you think about it, we're comparing to 2019, which was pre-pandemic, but we're also comparing to 2020 when you had, the pandemic was raging. You had several waves of the COVID pandemic, and we're still at double the rate of deaths compared to the pandemic year as well. Now, that gets much worse the younger you get. If you look at all doctors under the age of 40, the mortality rate is 5 times higher this year compared to 2019 or 2020. And when you look at all doctors under the age of 30, they're dying at a rate 8 times as high compared to 2019 and 2020. So this is really the shocking statistic. We have the information. This is very solid data. And it's when I get attacked for just raising concerns about this online, and usually I get attacked by doctors who are pushing the mRNA vaccines very aggressively. At first they attacked me saying, well, you have nothing to compare to and doctors die all the time. Okay, well, now that argument no longer holds. We have very, very solid data going back for the past 4 years. We have pre-pandemic data. We have data from 2020, which was, the pandemic year. And this is just something that you can't ignore or sweep under the rug. And I would just like to raise another point is that McMaster University came out last month and admitted publicly that 3 of their medical students and medical residents had died suddenly or unexpectedly this past summer. Now, this is one medical school in Canada reporting that 3 of their medical students died just this past summer. I mean, it's absolutely unprecedented. I've never heard of this in my career, and I would really lean on everybody else in medicine, whether doctor, nurse, or healthcare worker, if they've heard anything like this before, where you have 3 students dying from the same medical school in the same summer. And if you look at the ages of these medical students, Dr. Matthew Foss, 32 years old, anesthesiology resident. You have Dr. Candice Naiman, 27 years old, pediatrics resident. And then you have Dr. Satyan Choudhury, 25 years old, family medicine resident in his very first year of residency. All of them dying suddenly, unexpectedly, out of the blue. And I've got other young residents in my database. And so this for me is truly, when I see other doctors online on Twitter who've made their careers selling Pfizer and mRNA vaccines, mocking this and making fun of this, saying this is fake, this is nonsense, this is made up. I mean, it honestly, it makes me sick to my stomach that any doctor or any healthcare worker would think that this is a joke, that young doctors dying, in their own profession, that is something to laugh about or to make fun of. We have this group of doctors in Alberta called the Alberta MD War Room. And they're basically, political activists, who back the NDP government, Rachel Notley's, NDP party. and they are just mocking this and making fun of this. They're making fun of these deaths. And it's just, to me, it's absolutely disgusting.
How do you explain that response? What do you think is going on?
Honestly,
It's one thing to ignore it
yeah,
and to bury your head in the sand, but it's quite another to mock it.
it is. And I'm sort of, I'm reminded of that quote, first they ignore you, then, they make fun of you, then then they fight you, and then you win.
Mhm.
And we really seem to be going through this sort of process where, this has been ignored for a very long time. I mean, the first death in this list of 80 young doctors dying is at the end of December of 2020. This was a 48-year-old Vancouver obstetrician who would have had her first shot, and she died unexpectedly at her home. And so, this has been going on for almost 2 years. Now, the fact that I'm raising awareness of it now, doesn't mean that this hasn't been a problem for the past 2 years.
Yeah.
I just happen to be the person who put it together and is speaking about it because I can, because the college can't threaten my license. The health authorities can't threaten my job or can't threaten my hospital privileges. So I'm talking about this because I can, because other doctors can't. And
So
now for these,
do you have then doctors who are quietly approaching you in shock and encouraging you along or suggesting that they see the pattern as well, but they can't say anything? What's been the response of doctors that have reached out to you?
well, so I would separate it in this way. You have doctors internationally who are reaching out to me and thanking me, for bringing this to the public and really bringing it to their attention. I've had thank you letters. Usually they contact me through my LinkedIn. I've had doctors reach out to me. Just yesterday, I had a doctor from Barcelona, Spain, thanking me for talking about this. I've had doctors from Germany, South Africa, India. It's amazing when these doctors reach out to you and they've seen this information and they say, thank you. Yes, this has to be talked about. This is a problem. And then you have the Canadian doctors, like I said, the ones who are active on social media, who are just, and they can't attack the information. All they can say is, this is fake. Okay, fine. I mean, that's, all of this is available information. People can verify that these are real doctors who died. But, they can say that it's fake or whatever. But what they end up doing is, because they can't debate the information itself, then they'll start doing personal attacks. And so what you'll see on Twitter right now, the Canadian doctors who are responding to this, all they're doing is engaging in personal attacks. I actually compiled on my Getter account this morning a number of posts from Canadian doctors, very active online, who are basically just smearing me personally, and trying to destroy my reputation, rather than discuss what's actually happening to Canada's doctors and the fact that Canada's doctors are dying. Now, the response from the Canadian Medical Association and their leadership, who are all doctors, has been complete silence. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to address it. The current Canadian Medical Association president, Dr. Alika Lafontaine, who is actually a doctor from Alberta, and he's the first Indigenous president of the Canadian Medical Association. He has completely ignored this topic, ignored both of my letters that I've sent to him. I've sent him this information. I've sent him this data, the photographs of the doctors who've died, and all the information about them, and they've completely ignored it. And what's ironic is that he continues to push the mRNA vaccines. And he continues to talk about, restructuring healthcare and creating a new modern healthcare system. And he's ignoring, doctors dropping dead left and right. He just flew down to Orlando, Florida, where he co-hosted an international conference on physician health. Now, you think I'm joking about this, but I'm not. It's the Canadian Medical Association has just co-hosted the International Conference on Physician Health from October 13 to 15 in Orlando, Florida, where they gave a lot of talks about physician burnout and stress in healthcare and racism in healthcare and inclusion, diversity, and what have you, the typical leftist buzzwords. And the one thing that they didn't talk about is Canadian doctors dying suddenly or unexpectedly in record numbers. And really, our young doctors, our medical residents who are dropping dead at 8 times the rate compared to pre-pandemic era. Not a single word from them about this. So they're choosing the option to stay silent. However, the other doctors who are pushing mRNA vaccines on Twitter, they've turned really to anger and mockery of these deaths, which I just find, very distasteful and disgusting. I mean, if you don't believe it, that's one thing. You could say, I don't believe this, or I don't want to comment on this, but to go out of your way to mock these people's deaths, I just find that truly reprehensible.
And yeah, I mean, you should have been the keynote speaker at that conference.
I would have never gotten that
on physician health. The irony is that you were not invited to speak and address the group on the most pressing matter of the day for physician health. It's how can you explain this?
Exactly.
Tell me about the College of Physicians. Would they have they had, and you had any interaction with them or had any response from them?
I've had no response on this matter from the college. And of course, they haven't addressed it as well. They have a presence on Twitter, and they're pretending like this is not happening. Now, I'll tell you an interesting thing about the college that happened to me last year. I had co-signed a letter that was sent by several hundred healthcare workers to the Alberta Health Services CEO, Dr. Verna Yu, in opposition to the COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Now, Dr. Verna Yu, who was the CEO of Alberta Health Services, she came out, said, I will implement a COVID vaccine mandate. There was tremendous opposition to it. And she did it very aggressively, unilaterally, really with no input from the government, no input from anybody. She just came out one day in the media and said, I'm going to do this, and everyone has to get vaccinated by October 16, 2021, or you're going to lose your job. There was no pushback from the provincial government, from Jason Kenney, Tyler Shandro, who was the health minister at the time. They went missing in action. And so we had this really sudden, out of the blue, aggressive push to get every single doctor triple vaccinated, or at least double vaccinated by October 16, 2021. And so there were a lot of healthcare workers, obviously, who were very concerned about this and who were opposed to this. And what ended up happening was there was 26,000 healthcare workers out of the 105,000 that are working in Alberta refused to submit their vaccination status by the deadline. 26,000. So that represents, more than 25% of the workforce. And, a number of us had sent a letter in opposition to the vaccine mandates to the HSCO. Now, of course, she didn't respond to the letter. But what happened was I received a threatening email from the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta saying, listen, Dr. Makis, we now have received information that you co-signed this letter. It's going to be put on your record. Now, at the time, I was retired. So to have the college send me a threatening email with my license number, which is expired, and threatening me and saying, we're going to put this on your record, I was shocked. And what they said additionally in their threatening email was that, if you signed this letter by mistake, or if you co-signed this letter, or if you didn't sign this letter, then we'll give you a chance to say so, and then we'll put that also on your record. So they were basically giving a way out for doctors to backtrack and basically say, no, I didn't sign this letter in opposition to vaccine mandates. It was an implicit threat that, A, this is already going to be on your record, but if you want to backtrack and say that you weren't in opposition to vaccine mandates, then they would accept that and put that on your record also. Now imagine this is the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta sending threatening emails and letters to any doctor in Alberta who was in opposition to these vaccine mandates, which were unscientific, grossly unethical, and extremely harmful, as we found out. And now, we've got young doctors, dropping dead left and right, because they were forced into vaccine mandates and into, multiple vaccinations, mRNA vaccinations. And the college is going around threatening any doctor who would even voice, just co-sign a letter in opposition to it. So that was my experience with the college, during the pandemic.